Of course, Kant's ethics aren't perfect. There are many criticisms that have been levelled at them, not least those, of course, of being impractical, not considering what it's really like to be a human being rather than a rational and free robot. But one of the most significant criticisms of Kant's ethics has been what's known as his problem of radical evil. And this is a criticism that Kant himself faced up to in the last years of his life, particularly through the book Religion Within the Bounds of Reason Alone, which is originally a collection of 4 essays which were published one by one in a Berlin newspaper. In this book, Kant looks at his system and considers the problem that we should all be good, but really, can we? As I said earlier, it's very, very difficult to be good as Kant understands it. Being good means being free and rational in every single action. But human life is linear. We are born as babies and grow up as children, and then obviously experience a whole range of different emotions and experiences as an adult. And being consistently rational and consistently free throughout all these different experiences is impossible. Kant himself believed that in normal life it was impossible to be good. And if something is impossible, it seems very strange that in a rational world we would be expected to do it. It's very difficult to blame somebody for doing something they simply cannot do. There's a good example in The Wind in the Willows, one of my favourite children's films, where Toad is being judged for his crimes. And in one particular version, the judge flippantly says 19 years for the various different crimes that he's committed, and another year for being green. Now this does seem a little excessive, blaming Toad and sentencing him to an extra year in prison just for being green. He can't help it. There's nothing he can do about it. And it seems unjust, therefore, to blame it for it. But if human beings just can't be good, then can we really be blamed for not being so, for not being fully good? And if we can't be blamed for not being fully good, then the whole question of moral responsibility starts to yawn wide open once again. So, Kant has a real issue. His universe is a fair one. He has to presume that reason prevails and that things are the way that they seem to be. Otherwise, nothing makes sense. But on the other hand, it seems that there is an inherent unfairness in the universe. Human beings are being expected to do something they can't. And for Kant, this is a real problem. He also thinks that evil has a very particular characteristic, and that is that it tends to spread, like a disease, if you like. We commit one crime or we do one thing wrong, we act irrationally, even in a very small way, and it becomes easier and easier to do the same thing again. In fact, our whole moral characters can be affected by one very simple action. This sort of characteristic of evil he calls radical evil. A small little thing can spread and affect the whole basis of our moral decision making. It's like this idea of precedent that I referred to before. We act in an irrational way once, or a non-free way once, nothing particularly bad seems to happen, and therefore it becomes easier and easier to do the same thing again, and it becomes more and more difficult, of course, to act like a free and rational human being. So when we combine the fact that it's very, very difficult for us to be fully good, and therefore maybe that there is a problem with holding us responsible for not being, and the fact that evil tends to be something that spreads, something that starts small but ends up being very, very significant, Kant's whole ethics starts to have a real problem. Kant's ethics are built on the principle that human beings can overcome evil, they can act rationally, they can act freely. But there seems to be a problem with that. Perhaps we can't. And if we can't, to what extent can it be said to be human nature to be good, to be rational, to be free, if we can't do those things? So Kant's ethics have a real problem at the heart of the system. Now, as I said, Kant did face up to this issue. He did actually write about it. And his solution was somewhat unpalatable to philosophers at the time. Goethe accused him of having stained the cloak of his philosopher's cloak with a shameful stain of radical evil, so that Christians too might be enticed to kiss its hem. A very good dramatic quote from Goethe there. What did he mean by it? Basically, Goethe thought that radical evil was very much Kant smuggling the concept of original sin in by the back door. Now, Christians from the time of St. Augustine have believed that human beings are inherently evil and need the help of God, and particularly Jesus, to overcome this inherent evil and achieve salvation. Kant was brought up in a Lutheran environment which was influenced by Augustine's concepts of original sin, and Goethe believed the only reason why Kant was accepting this principle of radical evil and facing up to it in these essays, Religion Within the Bounds of Reason Alone, was to make his ideology more acceptable to Lutheran Christians. But if that was the case, it would seem strange, because the Prussian censor, that is the religious authority working on behalf of Frederick the Great, who was in charge of Prussia at the time, actually banned Kant from writing on religious subjects again, because his ideas were seen to be so disturbing to the Lutheran orthodoxy. So in writing this book, Religion Within the Bounds of Reason Alone, Kant got it from both sides. Goethe and his philosophical friends criticised him for being too Christian, and the Christian Church rejected him for being too controversial. So why did Kant face up to the problem? It all comes down really to his idea of religion, and particularly his particular brand of Christianity. Kant believed that Jesus was a perfect human being, and in his life demonstrated that although it is extremely difficult for a human being to be good, it is just possible. And in seeing Jesus in this way, Kant made his philosophical system work with the Christian religion. Not perhaps the conventional version of the Christian religion, but a rational variety of it, hence the title of the book, Religion Within the Bounds of Reason Alone. So for Kant, Jesus is essential, as an example showing us that what seems to be impossible actually isn't, and that we can overcome radical evil. God, of course, is important in Kant's ideology. He developed what's called the moral argument for the existence of God, which, although not really an argument, was a reason to believe based on the fact that it seemed to be a rational postulate to believe in God, given the fact that things seemed to be orderly, things seemed to be like a machine in Kant's world. This idea that this he wrote at the end of his life, actually it was an inscription on his tombstone: "Two things ever fill me with awe, the starry skies above me and the moral law within me." This awe that Kant felt for the fact that the universe was almost like clockwork. Everything was predictable, incredibly complex but wonderful, and very rational and orderly. And Kant, seeing the world in this way, the only explanation really for a rational person was God. We can't prove God's existence, and certainly he didn't accept things like religious experiences and miracles in the conventional way as evidence that way. That would go against Kant's idea of the universe being ordered and mechanistic. But the very existence of order in the universe, the very existence of human reason and, of course, human freedom, indicated that there had to be a God. So yes, to some extent, radical evil was Kant kowtowing to Christianity, but certainly it wasn't religion in any conventional sense. And perhaps it's that which remains Kant's most interesting legacy, the idea of how to frame Christianity within a rational compass.